The human ship constellation moved through space like a silver fish swimming through dark water. Inside the bridge, Captain Daniel Grant stood with his hands behind his back, watching the giant space station grow larger on the main screen. The station was called Meridian Point, and it looked like a massive wheel spinning slowly against the backdrop of stars. This was neutral ground, a place where no single species had control. It was the perfect location for what everyone was calling the most important meeting in galactic history. 12 different alien species were gathering here today. They would sit at the same table and try to create agreements that would bring peace to this part of the galaxy. Wars had been fought, resources had been fought over, territories had been disputed. Too many lives had been lost. Now finally everyone was willing to talk, and for the first time ever, humans were invited to participate. Earth was new to the galactic community, and this was their chance to prove they belonged. Daniel felt the weight of that responsibility on his shoulders. He was not just representing himself or his ship. He was representing his entire species. Every word he spoke, every action he took would shape how these alien races saw humanity for generations to come. It was terrifying and exciting at the same time. Lieutenant Kate Morrison approached him with a datapad glowing in her hands. She was his second in command, smart and careful, the kind of person who always thought 3 steps ahead. Right now her face showed concern. She said they needed to review the information about the other delegations before docking. Daniel nodded and told her to proceed. Kate started with the friendly species. The Aquilons were water-based creatures who valued art and philosophy. They would be easy to work with. The Skyriders were bird-like aliens who controlled valuable trade routes but rarely involved themselves in conflicts. They would be neutral but fair. The Crystalborn were silicon-based life forms with incredible computational abilities. They made decisions based purely on logic and data. As long as the numbers made sense, they would agree to reasonable terms. Then Kate's voice changed. It became slower, more careful. She moved to the next file and her eyes met Daniel's. She said they needed to talk about the Velkari. Daniel had heard that name before. Everyone in the human fleet had heard that name. The Velkari were legendary, and not in a good way. Kate explained what human intelligence had gathered about them. The Velkari were enormous, standing over 9 feet tall on average. Their bodies were covered in metallic silver skin that could deflect small weapons fire. They had 4 arms, each one strong enough to bend steel bars. Their bones were denser than human bones by a factor of 3. Their muscle tissue was more efficient. They could see in spectrums humans could not. They could hear sounds too low or too high for human ears. In almost every physical measurement, they were superior to humans. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was their culture. Velkari society was built entirely around strength and dominance. They believed that power gave you the right to lead. The strong commanded, the weak obeyed. There was no room for debate or compromise in their worldview. You either proved your worth through physical demonstration, or you were dismissed as irrelevant. They had walked out of negotiations with 6 different species already because they considered those species too weak to deserve their attention. Their ambassador to this summit was named Zara, and she had a reputation that made even hardened warriors nervous. She had personally led Velkari military campaigns that conquered 3-star systems. She had defeated their greatest arena champions in ritual combat. She had negotiated treaties that always favored the Velkari because no one dared argue with her. Intelligence reports said she was proud, aggressive, and completely unwilling to show respect to species she considered inferior. And humans, being small and physically unremarkable, definitely fell into that category. Commander Paul Bennett joined the conversation. He was the tactical officer, a former military man who had seen combat in the border conflicts near the outer colonies. He had strong opinions about risk management, and right now, every one of those opinions was screaming warnings. He told Daniel in plain terms that attempting direct contact with the Velkari was dangerous and unnecessary. They should handle all communication through intermediaries, preferably species that the Velkari already respected. Let someone else take the risk of offending her. Dr. Lisa Chang agreed completely. She was the ship's chief medical officer and head of the xenobiology team. She had studied every known alien species extensively. She pulled up files on her own datapad and showed Daniel the medical reports from the last time a human diplomat met with a Velkari representative. The meeting lasted less than 5 minutes. The Velkari had picked up the human diplomat, carried him out of the room like a misbehaving child, and deposited him outside the door. The diplomat was not physically injured, but he was so humiliated and frightened that he resigned from the diplomatic corps the next day. Lisa said the Velkari saw smaller species the way humans might see insects or small animals. They were not necessarily cruel, but they did not consider those species worthy of serious attention. A Velkari would no more negotiate with a human than a human would sit down to negotiate with a mouse. It was not personal. It was just how they viewed the universe. Strength mattered. Size mattered. Everything else was secondary. The warnings kept coming. The station's security chief, a tall alien with blue skin and 4 eyes, contacted the constellation before they docked. He had worked at Meridian Point for 10 years and had dealt with the Velkari many times. He advised Daniel in the strongest possible terms to avoid Ambassador Zara unless absolutely necessary. He said she had already expressed displeasure at having to share conference space with what she called lesser species. She had made it clear she was here only because the Velkari government insisted. She was looking for any excuse to leave early and declare the whole summit a waste of time. Even the other alien delegations sent subtle messages. The Aquilon suggested that humans might want to focus on building relationships with more receptive species first. The Skyriders mentioned that they had given up trying to work directly with the Velkari years ago, and now only communicated through third parties. The Crystalborn calculated that the probability of a successful human-Velkari negotiation was less than 3% based on historical data. Daniel listened to all of it. He read the reports. He studied the videos. He understood exactly what everyone was telling him. Meeting with Ambassador Zara was risky. She would likely be insulting at best and violent at worst. She would not respect him. She would not listen to him. She might humiliate him in front of the entire galactic community. There was no logical reason to attempt direct contact, but Daniel also understood something that none of the reports captured. Earth was the newest member of the galactic community. Humans had no history here, no reputation, no established relationships. They were starting from zero. Every other species at this summit already knew where they stood with each other. They had decades or centuries of interactions to build on. Humans had nothing. And if they wanted to build something, they could not afford to be cautious and timid. They needed to make a statement. Hiding behind intermediaries would send a clear message to everyone watching. It would say that humans were afraid. It would say that humans knew their place at the bottom of the hierarchy and accepted it. It would make every future negotiation harder because everyone would know that humans could be intimidated. Daniel understood that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was play it safe. He turned to his crew and told them his decision. He would meet Ambassador Zara in person, face to face with no intermediaries. Kate immediately started to protest, but Daniel held up his hand. He said he understood the risks. He knew what might happen. But humans did not get invited to this summit by being careful and avoiding challenges. They were here because they had fought for their place. They had proven themselves in a dozen small ways over the past few years. Now it was time to prove themselves in a big way. Paul argued that there was a difference between bravery and stupidity. Walking into a room with someone who could break you in half was not brave, it was suicidal. Daniel replied that it was only suicidal if he went in expecting to compete on her terms. He was not going to try to be stronger than a Velkari. That would be stupid. He was going to show her that strength came in different forms. Humans had survived on Earth not by being the biggest predator, but by being the smartest, the most adaptable, and the most stubborn. Those qualities got them to the stars. Those same qualities would get them through this meeting. Lisa made one last attempt. She asked what would happen if Daniel was wrong. What if Zara simply refused to speak with him? What if she threw him out like she did the last human diplomat? What if she hurt him? Daniel smiled and said that any of those outcomes would still be better than not trying. At least then everyone would know that humans had the courage to face the strongest species in the galaxy. Fear was contagious, but so was courage. He wanted to send the message that humans did not back down. The constellation docked at Meridian Point. The crew went through the arrival procedures, checking systems and securing the ship. Daniel changed into his formal uniform. Daniel's eyes adjusted to the light inside the Velkari chamber. The room was enormous, with ceilings that reached at least 20 feet high. Everything was built on a scale that made him feel like a child who had wandered into an adult's workspace. The furniture was massive. The doorways on the far walls could have accommodated a small vehicle. Even the decorations on the walls were oversized, showing what looked like battle scenes from Velkari history. In the center of all this space stood Ambassador Zara. Daniel had seen pictures and videos, but they had not prepared him for the reality of her presence. She was enormous, standing 9.5 feet tall even though her posture was relaxed. Her body was covered in metallic silver skin that caught the light and reflected it in strange patterns. The skin was not smooth like human skin but textured, with small geometric shapes that seemed to shift and move as she breathed. Her forearms were currently crossed over her chest in a gesture that needed no translation. It meant she was not happy about this interruption. 2 arms crossed high, 2 crossed low, creating a barrier of muscle and metal between herself and this small human who had entered her space. Her face was angular and sharp, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw. Her eyes were solid gold without any visible pupil, but Daniel could feel them tracking his every movement. The most striking feature was the patterns that glowed on her skin. They were lines and symbols that pulsed with bioluminescent light, changing colors based on her emotional state. Right now, they glowed a deep red that Daniel instinctively understood meant anger, or at least severe displeasure. The patterns moved slowly across her arms and face like living tattoos. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Zara looked down at Daniel from her great height. She did not move, did not speak, just stared at him for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. Then her voice filled the chamber, so deep and resonant that Daniel felt it in his chest as much as heard it with his ears. She asked why the humans had sent someone so small to meet with her. Her tone made it clear this was not a genuine question but an insult. Daniel had prepared for this moment. He had rehearsed different responses, different approaches, but now that he was actually here, standing in this giant's shadow, all his careful plans seemed inadequate. He decided to go with honesty. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them slightly, and introduced himself clearly. He said he was Captain Daniel Grant of the human vessel constellation, and he was the official diplomatic representative of Earth at this summit. He told her that humans came in only one size, and if she wanted to speak with humanity, she would have to speak with someone who looked like him. He kept his voice steady and his eyes on hers, even though looking up at such an angle was already making his neck hurt. He refused to show the fear that was currently making his heart pound against his ribs. Zara made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a growl. The distinction was hard to tell. She uncrossed one pair of arms and gestured at him dismissively. She said that in Velkari culture, physical size reflected inner strength. The strong grew tall and powerful. The weak remained small and fragile. By Velkari standards, Daniel's size marked him as someone who should be serving food or cleaning floors, not negotiating treaties between civilizations. Daniel felt anger flash through him, hot and sudden, but he controlled it. Getting angry would accomplish nothing. Instead, he responded calmly. He said that different species measured worth in different ways. The Velkari valued physical strength, which was their right, but humans valued other qualities equally: intelligence, creativity, courage, the ability to adapt and overcome obstacles. By human standards, those qualities mattered as much as muscle and bone. He told her that he had walked into this room knowing full well that she could break him like a dry stick. He came anyway, without weapons or guards, armed only with words and the willingness to be here. That decision required its own kind of strength. Perhaps not the kind she was familiar with, but strength nonetheless. He called it courage, and he said it was one of humanity's defining characteristics. Zara's glowing patterns flickered from red to orange. The color shift was subtle, but Daniel noticed it. Orange seemed to indicate surprise or curiosity. She moved closer to him, each step making the floor tremble slightly under her weight. She leaned down, bringing her face closer to his level. She said that courage was just a pretty word that weak creatures used to describe their fear. Brave prey was still prey. The end result was always the same. Daniel held his ground even as her shadow fell over him. He said that prey ran away, prey hid, prey avoided predators whenever possible. He had done the opposite. Every advisor he had told him to stay away from her. Every report warned him this meeting would end badly. But he came anyway because sometimes the right choice and the safe choice were not the same thing. If that made him prey in her eyes, then prey was apparently braver than she gave them credit for. For a moment, Zara said nothing. Her golden eyes studied him intently, as if she was trying to solve a puzzle she had not encountered before. Then she straightened to her full height and crossed all 4 arms again. She said that the Velkari had a tradition for situations like this. When someone's right to speak was questioned, they could prove themselves worthy through challenge. It was an ancient custom that predated their space travel by thousands of years. She explained that there was a challenge arena on the station, a training facility that the Velkari used to keep their warriors sharp during long space journeys. The arena tested physical ability, quick thinking, and survival instinct. It was designed for Velkari physiology, which meant it was extremely difficult and potentially dangerous. But it was also considered the purest test of worth in their culture. Complete the challenge, earn the right to be heard. Fail the challenge, accept that you are not worthy. She made him an offer. If Daniel could survive in the challenge arena for 3 minutes, she would grant him a proper audience. She would listen to what humanity had to say with an open mind. She would treat humans as legitimate participants in the summit, rather than annoying insects buzzing around the edges. But if he failed, if he quit or got hurt or could not complete the course, then humans would be asked to leave the summit entirely. Their presence would be considered an insult to serious species who had earned their place through strength. Daniel heard Kate's voice suddenly loud in his earpiece. She had been listening to everything through the communication device. She was almost shouting, telling him not to accept. She said the arena was designed for beings twice his size with 4 times his strength. The obstacles alone could kill a human. She begged him to decline the challenge and walk away. They could find another approach. There had to be another way. Paul's voice joined in, equally frantic. He was pulling up information about the Velkari challenge arena. He said the injury rate was significant even for Velkari warriors. The arena used real dangers, not simulations. Falls could break bones. Energy fields could burn skin. Moving obstacles could crush anything caught between them. Paul said that accepting this challenge was insane. No human could survive it. This was not bravery, it was suicide. But Daniel was not listening to the voices in his ear anymore. He was watching Zara's face. He saw something there that surprised him. She expected him to refuse. She had made this offer knowing that he would back down. This was not really about testing him. It was about proving her point. She wanted him to refuse so she could say that humans were exactly as weak and cowardly as she believed. She wanted confirmation of her worldview. That realization made Daniel's decision easy. He looked up at the towering alien and spoke clearly, making sure his voice did not shake. He accepted her challenge. He said that 3 minutes was not a very long time. He had endured harder things. He would complete her arena, and then she would listen to what humanity had to say, not because he begged or pleaded, but because he had earned it according to her own rules. The chamber went absolutely silent. Kate's voice in his earpiece cut off mid-sentence. Paul stopped talking. Even the ambient sounds of the station seemed to fade away. Zara's glowing patterns shifted rapidly through several colors, orange to yellow to something close to white, then back to orange. She stared at Daniel as if seeing him for the first time. She asked if he truly understood what he had just agreed to. This was not a game or a simulation. The arena was real. The dangers were real. Velkari warriors trained for years before attempting it. Some still failed. Daniel said he understood perfectly. He had made his choice with full knowledge of the risks. If she was offering him a path to be heard, he would take that path regardless of where it led. Turning back now would be worse than failing later. She had given him a chance to prove humanity's worth. He intended to take it. For the first time since Daniel entered the chamber, Zara's expression changed into something that might have been respect or might have been fascination. Her patterns glowed a warm orange-gold color. She said that no other species had ever accepted the challenge arena when offered. Most refused immediately. A few tried to negotiate for an easier test. One species actually attempted to bribe her to withdraw the offer. But this human, this small creature who barely reached her chest, had accepted without hesitate. The moment Daniel stepped fully into the arena, he felt everything change. The gravity was wrong. It pulled on him harder than normal, making his body feel heavy and slow. Each step required more effort. His arms felt like they had weights attached. This was standard gravity for Velkari, apparently. But for a human, it was like walking through water. He had 3 minutes in this crushing weight to cross a space designed for beings twice his size. The first platform was 10 feet away. For a Velkari with their powerful legs and height, it would be an easy jump. For Daniel, it might as well have been a canyon. He looked down. Below the platforms was nothing but darkness. He could not see the bottom. He did not want to know how far he would fall if he missed. The countdown timer on the wall showed 2 minutes and 50 seconds remaining. He was already wasting time, Daniel forced himself to think. He could not compete with Valkyrie's strength or size. Trying to do things their way would fail immediately. He needed to use what humans were good at. Humans survived on Earth not by being the strongest or fastest predators. They survived by being clever. They used tools. They found unconventional solutions. They adapted to circumstances instead of trying to overpower them. He dropped to his stomach and looked over the edge of his starting platform. There was a gap below, but there was also a support beam running underneath. It was narrow, maybe 6 inches wide, clearly not meant to be walked on, but it connected his platform to the next one. A Valkyrie could not use it because they were too heavy and their feet were too large, but Daniel was smaller and lighter. He slid over the edge and dropped onto the beam. His feet found the metal surface, his arms spread wide for balance. He took quick, careful steps along the beam. The heavy gravity tried to pull him off. He fought against it, muscles straining. 10 feet felt like a mile, but he reached the other side and pulled himself up onto the next platform. The crowd outside made sounds of surprise. That was not how Valkyrie moved through the arena, but it worked. 2 minutes and 30 seconds left. Daniel looked ahead. A series of moving platforms rotated in a complex pattern. A Valkyrie would time their jump and leap from one to the next, using their strength to bridge the gaps. Daniel did not have that option. Instead, he waited and watched the pattern. Everything moved on a schedule. There was a rhythm to it. He just needed to find it. He saw it. Every 15 seconds, 3 platforms aligned in a way that created a shorter path. The gaps were still too far to jump, but they were close enough that maybe, just maybe, he could use momentum. He waited for the alignment, counting in his head. When the moment came, he did not jump. He ran forward and dropped, sliding under a sweeping barrier that would have knocked him off the platform. His momentum carried him to the edge. He grabbed it with both hands and used his body weight to swing forward to the next platform. His hands caught the edge. His shoulder screamed in pain from the impact. The heavy gravity pulled at him, trying to tear his grip loose. He pulled with everything he had, arms shaking, and dragged himself up. He rolled away from the edge just as another platform swung past, close enough that he felt the wind from its passage. 2 minutes left. From the observation window, Zara watched intently. Her forearms were no longer crossed. She was leaning forward, her golden eyes tracking every movement. She began to narrate to the gathered crowd, her voice carrying through the communication system. She pointed out that the human was not attempting Valkyrie techniques. He was creating his own path. He was using the arena's structure in ways it was not designed for. He was treating obstacles as tools. Some of the Valkyrie warriors in the crowd grumbled. This was not proper. This was not how the challenge should be completed. But Zara silenced them with a gesture. She said the rules were simple. Reach the marker in 3 minutes. The method was not specified. If the human could find a path that Valkyrie had never considered, that itself was a kind of strength worth noting. Daniel reached a section where the platforms were separated by energy fields. The fields crackled with power, clearly dangerous to touch. A Valkyrie would leap over them, clearing the field entirely. Daniel could not jump that high. But he noticed something. The energy fields pulsed. They were not constant. There was a brief moment every few seconds where the field dimmed slightly. Maybe it was a safety feature. Maybe it was just the nature of the technology. Either way, it was a gap he could use. He waited for the pulse, watching the pattern. When the field dimmed, he moved. He did not try to jump over it. Instead, he slid under it, his body low and flat, moving through the space where the energy was weakest. He felt heat on his back. The field was still dangerous even at its lowest power, but he made it through. His shirt was smoking slightly, but his skin was intact. 1 minute and 30 seconds remaining. The crowd was no longer making dismissive sounds. They were silent, watching. Some of the aliens who had been placing bets were suddenly reconsidering their wagers. Kate had her face pressed against the glass, her hands clenched into fists. Paul was recording everything, his tactical mind already analyzing how this human ability to adapt could be applied in other situations. Lisa had stopped preparing medical equipment and was simply watching in amazement. Daniel reached a rotating cylinder that spanned a large gap. The cylinder's surface was covered with handhold sized for Valkyrie hands. A Valkyrie would grab on and let the rotation carry them across, then jump off at the right moment. Daniel tried to reach the handholds, but they were too large and too far apart. His human hands could not grip them properly. The cylinder was spinning too fast for him to climb onto it. 1 minute left. He was running out of time. The completion marker was visible now on the far side of the arena, glowing blue on a distant platform. He had come so far, but this obstacle seemed insurmountable. He looked around desperately for another option. There had to be something. Humans did not give up. They found a way, then he saw it. There were cables running along the ceiling of the sphere, probably power lines or data connections. They were thin and not meant to be touched, but they ran roughly parallel to the path he needed to take. If he could reach them somehow, if they could support his weight, they would bypass several obstacles, including this rotating cylinder. Daniel looked at the debris scattered on the platform, pieces of broken equipment from previous training sessions. He grabbed a metal rod about 3 feet long and tested its weight. It would have to do. He backed up, ran forward, and used the rod to vault upward. It was a technique he had learned as a child, pole vaulting in school competitions. He never imagined it would save his life in an alien arena. His hands caught the cable. It was thin and cut into his palms. The cable sagged under his weight but held. He hung there for a moment, swinging. 45 seconds remaining. He began to move hand over hand along the cable. His arms burned. His hands were slipping. The heavy gravity pulled at him relentlessly. Every second was agony. Every movement took more strength than he thought he had. The cable was carrying him across the open space. Below him, obstacles continued their deadly dance. If he fell now, there was nothing to catch him. 30 seconds. His grip was failing. His hands were wet with sweat or blood, he could not tell which. His arms shook with exhaustion. 20 seconds. He could see the completion marker. It was so close. Just a little further. 15 seconds. The cable ended at a junction point attached to the wall. Daniel swung his legs forward, building momentum. 10 seconds. He let go of the cable and flew through the air. His trajectory was good, but his body was so tired he could barely control it. 5 seconds. He stretched out his hand toward the marker. 4 seconds. His fingers were inches away. 3 seconds. He pushed with the last of his strength. 2 seconds. His hand slapped against the blue marker. 1 second. The timer hit 0. A loud tone rang through the arena. The lights changed from white to green. The moving platforms began to slow and settle into rest positions. Daniel collapsed on the platform where the marker stood. He could not move. Every muscle in his body was screaming. His hands were torn and bleeding. His arms felt like they had been pulled from their sockets, but he was alive. He had done it. 3 minutes in hell and he had survived. The observation windows erupted in sound. Different species made different noises, but the meaning was universal. They were shocked. Some were cheering. Others were arguing about what they had just witnessed. The betting crowd was in chaos as unexpected outcomes required payouts. Kate was crying with relief. Paul was shaking his head in disbelief. Lisa was already heading toward the arena entrance with her medical kit. The arena door opened and the platforms began to move into a configuration that would allow safe exit. But before Daniel could even try to stand, a massive figure entered the sphere. Zara walked across the platforms with casual ease, covering in seconds what had taken Daniel 3 minutes of desperate struggle. She approached the platform where he lay, gasping for breath. Her shadow fell over him. Her glowing patterns had changed to a brilliant gold color. She looked down at him, and for the first time since they met, there was no contempt in her expression. She extended one of her massive hands. The hand was easily the size of Daniel's torso. He stared at. Daniel spent the next 12 hours in the medical bay. Dr. Lisa Chang refused to let him leave until she was absolutely certain he had not done permanent damage to himself. She treated the lacerations on his hands and palms where the cable had cut into his skin. She examined his shoulders and elbows, which were badly strained from supporting his full body weight in heavy gravity. She ran scans to check for internal injuries from the physical stress. The results were not terrible, but they were not great either. He was bruised, exhausted, and would be sore for days. But nothing was broken or torn beyond repair. He would recover. While he rested, the station's gossip network went into overdrive. Everyone was talking about the human who survived the Valkyrie Challenge arena. The video footage was being shared across dozens of alien networks. Different species had different reactions. Some were impressed. Others thought he got lucky. A few argued that Zara should not have accepted such an unconventional completion, but no one could deny that he had touched the marker before time expired. By the stated rules, he had succeeded. Kate sat with Daniel during his recovery. She told him he was an idiot for accepting that challenge. She also told him she was incredibly proud of what he accomplished. Those two statements seemed contradictory, but somehow they were both true. She said the entire crew had watched the whole thing and their hearts had stopped multiple times. Paul had nearly worn a hole in the floor from pacing. Even the usually calm officers on the bridge were shouting at the screens. On the second day after the arena challenge, a message arrived from the Velkari delegation. Ambassador Zara requested a private meeting with Captain Grant at his earliest convenience. The message was formal, but the tone was different from their first encounter. There was no dismissive language, no implications that he was wasting her time. It was a genuine invitation between diplomatic equals. Daniel replied that he would meet her that evening. They met in a neutral conference room rather than in either of their delegation quarters. The room was designed to accommodate multiple species with furniture in various sizes. Daniel chose a human-sized chair at the table. Zara had to use a reinforced bench that was bolted to the floor to support her weight. They sat across from each other with a table between them. This time, Daniel noticed, her glowing patterns started at orange rather than red. She was curious rather than angry. Zara began by asking how he was feeling. Daniel admitted he was sore and would probably be sore for another week. But he was functional and ready to work. Zara made that rumbling laugh sound he was beginning to recognize. She said that Velkari warriors who completed the arena at that difficulty usually took 3 days to recover. The fact that he was up and moving after less than 2 days was itself impressive. Human resilience was apparently greater than their physical strength suggested. They talked about the arena for a while. Zara was fascinated by the methods he used. She asked him to explain his thinking at various points. Why did he go under obstacles instead of over them? Why did he use equipment that was not meant to be used? Daniel explained that humans called it improvisation. When you did not have the right tool for the job, you used whatever was available and made it work. Humans had been doing that for thousands of years. It was one of their survival strategies. Zara said that Velkari culture discouraged improvisation. They believed in using tools correctly and following established methods. Doing things the wrong way, even if it worked, was seen as dishonorable. But watching Daniel in the arena made her question that philosophy. He had succeeded where a Velkari following proper methods would have expected a smaller species to fail. Maybe there was value in approaches that Velkari tradition dismissed. The conversation shifted to more personal topics. Zara asked Daniel why humans wanted to be part of this galactic community so badly. Humans were new to space travel compared to most species here. They had no established territories or trade routes. They had no military power that could threaten or defend against the major civilizations. They were small, weak, and insignificant by most measures. Why not stay in their own corner of space and avoid the complications of galactic politics? Daniel thought about the question carefully before answering. He said that humans had always been explorers and curious about what existed beyond their current boundaries. When they lived in small tribes, they wondered what was over the next hill. When they lived in villages, they wondered what was across the ocean. When they mastered their planet, they wondered what was among the stars. It was fundamental to human nature. They needed to know, to discover, to connect with others. Staying isolated would feel like a kind of death to the human spirit. He also said that humans understood they had much to learn from older civilizations. The species at this summit had technologies humans had not invented yet. They had solved problems humans were still struggling with. They had perspectives shaped by completely different evolutionary paths. All of that knowledge and experience was valuable. Humans wanted access to it. But more than that, humans believed they had something to contribute as well. Maybe their ideas and approaches would be useful to others. The way improvisation in the arena had surprised Zara. Zara was quiet for a moment. Her patterns shifted through several colors, settling on a soft gold. She said she volunteered to come to this summit for a specific reason. The Velkari were expanding into new regions of space. They kept encountering smaller species who refused to accept Velkari authority peacefully. These species would fight wars they could not possibly win rather than submit. Many Velkari leaders saw this as pure stupidity. Why choose destruction over survival under Velkari protection? But Zara had begun to wonder if there was something the Velkari were not understanding. Why would rational beings choose hopeless resistance? She came to this summit hoping to find answers. And in the past few days, talking with Daniel and watching him in the arena, she thought she was beginning to understand. Those species resisted because submitting meant giving up what made them unique. It meant accepting that their way of doing things was inferior. It meant losing their identity and becoming pale copies of Valkyrie. She said that watching Daniel in the arena was revelatory. He could not match her in size or strength. If he tried to become like a Valkyrie, he would always be a weak Valkyrie, always inferior. But by remaining completely human, by using human methods and human thinking, he accomplished something that was impressive in its own right. If she forced him to abandon those methods and adopt Valkyrie ways, that unique strength would be lost. The galaxy would be poorer for it. Daniel said that diversity was valuable. Different species approached problems differently. The solution that worked perfectly for Valkyrie might fail for humans and vice versa. But if species shared their solutions and learned from each other, everyone benefited. The key was respect. Each species needed to respect that others had valid approaches even if they looked strange or wrong from their own perspective. Zara agreed, but pointed out that respect had to be earned. The Valkyrie earned respect through strength. They showed what they could do and others acknowledged it. That was why the challenge arena existed. It was a way to prove worth through action rather than words. She asked Daniel what he thought humans needed to do to earn respect from the various species at this summit. Daniel said humans needed to be authentic. They needed to show who they really were rather than trying to imitate species they thought were superior. In the arena, he succeeded by being human, not by trying to match Valkyrie methods. That same principle applied to diplomacy. Humans should offer their actual strengths, their creativity and adaptability and determination, rather than pretending to have strengths they lacked. Honesty about both capabilities and limitations would build more lasting relationships than false bravado. They talked for hours that first evening. When they finally parted, Zara told Daniel that she would recommend to her government that the Valkyrie establish formal diplomatic and trade relations with Earth. She said that humans were more interesting than she initially believed. Daniel thanked her and said he hoped this was the beginning of a long friendship between their peoples. Zara made her rumbling laugh and said that friendship was a human concept. Valkyrie did not have friends. They had worthy opponents and useful allies. Daniel replied that maybe she just called them something different, but the idea was similar. She did not argue with that. Over the next several days, Daniel and Zara met regularly. They worked together on the general summit agreements. They also began drafting a specific treaty between Earth and the Valkyrie homeworlds. The treaty covered trade in raw materials and technology. It established cultural exchange programs. It created a framework for mutual defense if either civilization was threatened by outside forces. It was comprehensive and fair to both sides. Other delegations noticed the human-Valkyrie cooperation, and it changed their perception of humanity. If the proud Valkyrie were willing to treat humans as equals, maybe other species should reconsider their initial assessments. The Aquilons approached Daniel with proposals for scientific collaboration. The Skyriders offered favorable terms on trade routes. Even the cautious Crystalborn expressed interest in exchanging data on various topics. Humanity was being accepted into the galactic community, largely because the cargo bay was a scene of controlled chaos. On one side stood the Chitter delegation, insectoid beings with hard exoskeletons that clicked and clattered as they moved. They had multiple limbs and compound eyes that reflected light in unsettling ways. Their weapons were not drawn, but their posture was aggressive, bodies low and ready to spring forward. There were at least 20 of them, all speaking in rapid, chittering sounds that the translation devices struggled to keep up with. On the other side stood the Luminids, beings that looked like they were carved from living crystal. Light passed through their translucent bodies and refracted into rainbow patterns. They had no obvious faces, but somehow Daniel could sense they were glaring at their opponents. They communicated through pulses of colored light that flashed across their surfaces. Their weapons were energy-based, already charging with power that made the air crackle. There were fewer Luminids, perhaps a dozen, but each one looked formidable. Between the two groups, trying desperately to maintain order, were the station's security forces. They consisted of a mix of species, all of them looking overwhelmed and uncertain. Their leader was a gray-skinned alien with 6 legs and multiple eyes, someone Daniel had met briefly during the docking procedures. The security chief looked immensely relieved when Zara entered the bay. She approached him quickly and asked for a situation report. The chief explained rapidly. A resource-rich asteroid had been discovered in a disputed territory between Chitter and Luminid space. Both species claimed they found it first. Both insisted they had legal rights to mine it. The argument had been simmering for weeks during the summit negotiations. Today it boiled over. Now both species were threatening to leave the summit and settle the matter with their fleets. Ships were already moving into position outside the station. This could become a shooting war within hours. Zara nodded and walked directly into the center of the cargo bay. Her massive size and presence immediately drew attention from both groups. The chittering from the chitters diminished slightly. The light flashes from the Luminids became less aggressive. Zara's voice boomed across the space, amplified by the bay's acoustics. She told them they were behaving like immature children fighting over a piece of food, while the table was laden with enough for everyone. The chitter leader stepped forward. His translation device rendered his rapid clicking into understandable speech. He said with respect to the ambassador, this was not Velkari business. The chitters and Luminids had been in conflict long before the Velkari became a spacefaring species. This was about honor and ancient territorial rights. The asteroid was in their ancestral space and they would not yield it. The Luminid speaker pulsed bright, angry red light. Her translated words came through as sharp and clipped. She said the chitters were liars who constantly rewrote history to suit their claims. The asteroid was discovered by Luminid explorers. They had the navigational logs to prove it. They would not allow thieves to steal what was rightfully theirs. Zara tried to appeal to logic. She pointed out that the galaxy was vast and full of resources. One asteroid was insignificant in the larger picture. Fighting a war over it would cost both sides far more than the asteroid was worth. They should find a compromise and move forward. But her words fell flat. The chitter leader said that Velkari always thought they could solve problems with strength and intimidation. The Luminid speaker agreed, saying that this was exactly why smaller species needed to stand together against larger ones who thought might made right. Daniel realized that Zara's presence was actually making things worse. Both species saw her as another powerful bully trying to force them into submission. They were united in their resentment of her, even if they hated each other. He stepped forward, moving past Zara into the open space between the two groups. Compared to everyone else in the room, he looked tiny. Some of the aliens did not even notice him at first, but when he spoke, his voice carried clearly in the sudden silence. He said he understood their anger and their fear. He understood what it felt like to be a smaller species dealing with larger ones who did not seem to respect you. Just a few days ago, he faced a similar situation. He could have avoided Ambassador Zara, could have used intermediaries to stay safe. Everyone told him it was the smart choice. But he decided to take a risk instead. He walked into her chamber knowing she could hurt him or humiliate him. He took that risk because he believed that hiding from challenges was worse than facing them. Daniel said that taking that risk turned out to be the best decision he ever made. Now Earth and the Velkari were working together on agreements that would benefit both civilizations. They were learning from each other. They were building something new. But none of that would have happened if he let fear control his choices. Fear would have kept him safe in the short term, but isolated in the long term. He walked slowly toward the Chitter delegation. He asked them to explain their side of the dispute. Not accusations or ancient history, but specifically what they needed from this asteroid. The Chitter leader seemed surprised by the question. After a moment of clicking consultation with his companions, he explained. The Chitters had developed advanced mining technology that could extract resources from dangerous environments. But they lacked certain processing capabilities for rare minerals. The asteroid contained exactly those minerals. Without access to them, the Chitters would have trouble trading with other species for essential goods. Daniel thanked him and turned to the Luminids. He asked them the same question. What did they need from the asteroid? The Luminid speaker pulsed with suspicious yellow light but answered. Luminids were partially crystalline beings who could process certain minerals through their own bodies. But they had difficulty mining in unstable areas. The asteroid was located in a region with high radiation and gravitational anomalies. Their equipment was not designed for such harsh conditions. They needed the minerals, but extracting them safely was nearly impossible for them. Daniel looked between the two groups. He said that he was just a human, new to galactic politics, so maybe he was missing something obvious. But it seemed to him that they each had exactly what the other needed. The Chitters could mine the asteroid safely with their advanced technology. The Luminids could process the minerals efficiently with their natural abilities. If they worked together, both groups would get more than either could get alone. The asteroid was valuable enough to support cooperation instead of competition. The Chitter leader made a dismissive clicking sound. He said it was not that simple. They did not trust the Luminids. How could they be sure the Luminids would not keep the best minerals for themselves during processing? How could they verify fair distribution? The Luminid speaker flashed angry red again. She said the same concern applied in reverse. How could they trust Chitters not to damage the minerals during extraction? How could they know that Chitters would deliver everything they mined? Zara had been standing quietly watching Daniel work. Now she spoke again, but her tone was completely different from before. It was not commanding or aggressive. It was almost gentle, almost vulnerable. She said she came to the summit with very fixed beliefs about which species were worthy of respect and which were not. She believed the strong deserved to rule and the weak deserved to follow. She thought that was natural law, unchangeable and obvious. Then a human who was less than half her height taught her one of the most important lessons she had ever learned. He showed her that strength came in many forms. Physical power was one kind, but creativity was another. Adaptability was another. Courage was another. And the greatest strength of all might be the ability to admit when you were wrong and change your mind based on new information. That was a strength the Velkari had lost because they were so physically powerful, they rarely had to reconsider anything. She looked at Daniel and her patterns glowed warm gold. She told the Chitters and Luminids that if she, proud warrior of the mighty Velkari, could learn to respect and work with humans after initially dismissing them as irrelevant, then surely they could learn to trust each other enough to share one asteroid. She said she would personally guarantee their agreement. If either side betrayed the other, they would answer to her. And no species in this room wanted that. The cargo bay fell silent. The Chitter leader and the Luminid speaker looked at each other across the empty space. Seconds passed. Daniel held his breath. Then the Chitter leader clicked something to his companions and stepped forward. He said they would agree to discuss the terms of a joint operation. The Luminid speaker pulsed cautious yellow light and said they would do the same. It was not peace yet. It was not even friendship, but it was the possibility of cooperation, which was more than existed 5 minutes ago. The security chief immediately began organizing a neutral conference room for the two groups to continue discussions. Zara offered to mediate if they wanted a neutral third party. Both sides accepted. As the crowd began to disperse, Daniel felt the tension in his shoulders finally release. Kate appeared at his side, having watched everything from the entrance. She said he had a habit of walking into situations where he had no business being, and somehow making them better.